When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Goblin YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be talking about, is there a POV problem in Winds of Winter? Now, I know this has been a very commonly debated subject in the fandom, that because there's so many POVs, that's what's slowing down George and all of that. In this video, we're going to go through all 20 POVs that are still in the story in Winds of Winter, and why maybe this is a little bit overblown. I'm not saying that it isn't an issue for George just because you have so many characters, but I'm not sure if actually balancing all of the POVs is really the problem. I think there's a underlying issue that we're going to talk about in this video that's really more of the issue, more than just the number of actual POVs. But before we get into the video, if you would like to learn more about A Song of Ice and Fire or Winds of Winter, or you just enjoy this world, consider subscribing for more content like this. But the way we're going to do this video is we're going to go through each kind of region. And I have a specific reason as to why I'm doing it by region, because I think it's, when you look at some of the areas and some of the plot lines that have multiple POVs within them, it gets a little bit easier to understand where maybe I am arguing that the POVs are not really the problem. It's the actual plot lines. It's how getting all of these characters together could be the real issue that George is facing. And the real problem of, okay, this character needs way more to happen to get them to where they need to be by the end of the story, whereas another character, maybe not so much. So let's take a look at Meereen/Essos first. So we have three main plot lines within Essos. One is Arya. And now Arya, again, I think her plot is going to be resolved really in the first third with Essos and Braavos. And I think she's going to come down to kind of the Riverlands POVs that we'll talk about a little bit later in the video. So she's a character, again, that I think inherently is going to get moved to a different group of the POVs. But yeah, so I think early on, George has a little bit of work that he has to do with this character. We've seen a little bit of it in the Winds of Winter sample chapters. George more or less has to wrap up Arya's entire Braavos plot to then get her back into the main story. I think it's actually more of the simpler plot lines for George and how he has to do it. It's kind of more straightforward than some of the other ones. But yeah, you then have Dany. Now you might be thinking, okay, wait, isn't Dany, tied into the Tyrion, Victarion, and Barristan POVs? And not really in this book specifically, because again, Dany has been captured by the Dothraki. So again, George is going to have to fix all that plot and then have to put all of Dany with the other three POVs, if there even still are three by the time Dany gets back. But even as I say this, right, let's look at the POVs that are all going to be together by at least, I'd probably say, the halfway point of the story, given that they're all still alive. So we have Barristan, Victarion, and Tyrion. All of these characters right now are in the Battle of Fire outside of Meereen. And so let's say all these characters survive, which I think is possible. I think Barristan, Victarion, and Tyrion survive all of this. I think Barristan is the one that will have the biggest question mark on him, because I do think he could die in this battle, given maybe a betrayal by the Shave Pate. But still, I think he'll be alive. So by the time we see Winds of Winter start and the Battle of Fire conclude, you have three POVs in one area. So this is the thing that I'm going to talk about a lot with these POVs, is that you don't necessarily need to have a bunch of POVs with these characters, right? You can have Barristan be a POV and looking into things that Tyrion and Victarion are doing, right? Just like with King's Landing, we had multiple different POVs going on. You had Tyrion, for instance, you had Sansa. It didn't always have to be Tyrion. And to me, that's what I think is just going to happen. I think a character like Tyrion, his POVs will get limited to where they were in the past. A character like Barristan and Victarion still will kind of remain as more minor POVs. And then Dany comes back, and I think even her POVs will go down a bit. Just because you have other POVs that can view the events that are happening through different eyes, right? So say, for instance, Dany sacks a city. You don't always have to see it from Dany's POV. You can see it from Barristan's POV. You can see it from Tyrion's POV. And that's the thing where I look at it and I'm like, yes, Dany's storyline has a long way to go. A lot of things have to happen in Winds of Winter. And I think by far, she is one of the most difficult characters for George to write. But it's not due to the POVs. It's due to what George has set up for her story and what she has to accomplish by the time Winds of Winter ends. But that kind of gets us into the next major plot line, and this one has a ton of POVs. So in the north, we have Jon Snow, Bran, Davos, Mel, Asha, and Theon. Now, this one, again, I don't think is that big of an issue because a lot of these POVs are going to be in the same areas. It's not everyone spread out, really, right? The major ones here are going to be Davos and Bran because they're like just in different positions, and they have to eventually get back to kind of our main hub, which they should by the end of the story. But the issue is going to be, okay, well, Bran, he's north of the wall at this point, so we know a lot has to happen with him to get back up with our group with Jon and all of these other characters, assuming Jon just does come back. We also have to see Davos, finish up that whole plot with Skagos and come back. And so I do inherently think that the North, given those two plot lines, will be more difficult. Now, the interesting part that I've talked about in the past on this channel is that what if Jon Snow comes back and isn't even a POV anymore? Because there is this weird, Mel chapter that we get with Dance, and it kind of seems out of place. It's a great chapter, but it does seem out of place because we randomly just get one Mel chapter and that's it. And for me, it really felt like, okay, that was used to establish that there's going to be another POV when Jon dies, and which makes sense, right? Somebody has to be the POV for Jon's death. You can't just not have somebody at the wall. And so Mel is either going to be used in one of two ways, right? She'll be a POV that is just used until Jon comes back, or she'll be more of our main POV, and we actually won't even get a Jon POV again, which I don't know if I see that happening. I think that's interesting because Jon is going to be coming back from the dead, or at least his spirit will be coming back into his body. Maybe you believe that he warged into a ghost, which is what I believe, so that he maybe won't be as changed. But still, it could be a situation where George goes the Stoneheart route and we don't get Jon POVs anymore, and Mel is kind of our look into that. But either way, right, some of these POVs are kind of tied together. Theon and Asha are tied together. Mel and Jon Snow are tied together. Davos, again, is its own little plot, and we also have Bran having his own little plot. So whereas I think, yes, there are a lot of POVs in the north, think about Jon and Mel, right? Once the first third of the book is done, it looks like probably Jon, Mel, Asha, and Theon very likely could all be in the same camp by even the halfway point of the book. So with that being said, we come to the same issue, or we come to the same conclusion with Meereen and Essos. A lot of these characters, just because of how many are next to each other, may get limited in POVs, right? Because they're all together. Maybe in one chapter you'll see it through Asha's eyes, one chapter you'll see it through Theon's eyes, and then maybe between Mel and Jon, one of them just gets faded out. If we still have Jon as a POV, maybe Mel's role gets limited. Maybe she gets sent away because she burned Shireen. All of these things are possible. So I think when you look at it, I also see that Bran in the north is a POV that I don't think we'll have going forward. I think at a certain point, you can't have Bran as a POV. He's someone that's going to know too much. I think the end goal plans for George are going to be in Bran to where you can't have him be a POV. So I think right away, there's at least, I think, 2 POVs in the north that will be gone probably within the first half to 3/4 of the book. And again, this isn't even a mention, right? If George decides to kill off a character like Victarion and Barristan in the Meereen Essos plot, we could very easily, by the end of the book, only have Dany and Tyrion for the Essos plot, or the Dany camp. So that's something to also keep in mind. We've touched the 2 major POV areas, right? The rest of them now only have a couple in each area we're going to talk about. And I think there's a good chance that half of the POVs get cut off from both of those camps. And so when you kind of look at it and you put at, okay, if we get to the halfway point of the book, really there's 5 different plot lines throughout those first 2, and that's covering, again, our first half of our POVs, which is not a ton, right? We then have the Vale, which is going to be Sansa, and again, I think the Vale plot is going to take quite a while to fix up and to go forward with, so I don't think this is one of those where I can be like, oh yeah, it's going to meet up with, for instance, Brienne and Jaime and Arya and the Riverlands at like the end of the book, which could be likely, but again, we're going to see a Vale plot, I think, for a good portion of this book. And so I think Sansa will be a major and vital POV to Winds of Winter. In the Riverlands, we have Brienne and Jaime, and then eventually probably will be joined by Arya, and then maybe even Sansa by the end of the book. But Brienne and Jaime right now, again, they are literally with each other right now. So instead of getting, say, 2 Brienne POVs, we'll probably just get one Brienne, one Jaime. Again, kind of cutting down on their POVs, in my opinion. I think the 2 will be interlocked quite a bit. I think maybe when we see the Riverlands plot kind of shape up, you'll see maybe Jaime go to King's Landing. Brienne could be more with Arya, the Riverlands in the North plot. So again, you could see these 2 break up by the end of by like the midpoint of this story. But again, for the first half, I don't see a POV problem because they're with each other. You basically combine 2 POVs into one. Again, kind of similar to the way Storm of Swords kind of did this character dynamic. Moving on, we then have the Crownlands / the Stormlands. So again, these are just 3 POVs that are going to be intertwined throughout the story. But Cersei, Arianne, and Jon Con. So Arianne and Jon Con are going to be directly connected, right? Those 2 are just going to be our looks into young Griff. Same situation, in my opinion, as Jaime and Brienne, except they're going to be out throughout the whole book. So instead of both of these having massive POVs, they're both going to be probably split. Cersei, again, I think she will reprise her role of having a massive POV. I think she'll be one of the largest, given that she's our only POV into King's Landing at this point of the story. Moving on, we have the Reach plot. So this is going to be Aeron Damphir and Samwell Tarly. Again, Aeron Damphir, given what we saw in the Forsaken chapter in Winds of Winter, he's probably going to die. It would be my guess. So I don't think there's a POV problem there because I think he's going to die pretty early on. Samwell, again, I think is going to be our massive eyes into the Citadel, into the Euron plot. So again, I do think he will also have a massive role. And that leads us to the last one, which will be Arya Hoda. I have predicted that Arya Hoda is going to die pretty early into the story when he confronts Darkstar. Maybe George keeps him alive and he's a really, really minor POV, just a look into Duran every once in a while. But I don't think so. I think this is where Arya Hoda ends as a POV and it gets rid of another one. So again, I want to point this out, right? So let's go back. There's really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's really 10 major storylines going on, and those are going to be divided up into about 18 POVs, given that I think 2 of the 20 will probably die very early on in the story. And so we look at, I think for me, 10 plot lines is not that much. It is a lot considering maybe some of the earlier books, but even then, I mean, think about all the plans that were going on. I think the biggest issue is not the POVs. The biggest issue is, how do we get Dany to Westeros? How do we get the entire North plot rolling where someone has to have control of the North, whether it's Stannis, whether it's Rickon, whether it's Jon, whether it's whoever, right? How are we going to get that all figured out? The others have to probably be through the wall by the end of the book. How are we going to get the Riverlands plot wrapped up, where either the Tullys are back in charge or this or that? How does the Stoneheart plot end? How does the King's Landing plot end? Because you have to assume young Griff may be on the throne at this point. Does Cersei get back to Casterly Rock? There's just a lot of places we have to get to by the end of this book. And it's not really a POV issue. It's, okay, combining everyone and getting everyone together. Because once all these characters together, it does get easier to write the story. And so that to me is the biggest problem for George. And it's not exactly a POV problem. It's more of a story problem. Some of the things that George has set up that he wants to get done in one book instead of splitting it up into 2. But thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.